Hello and welcome back to the channel. Recently my husband and I planned a trip to Nashville, Tennessee, and I was so excited to learn that we would be passing by Mansfield, Missouri, home of Rocky Ridge Farm where Laura and Almanzo Wilder lived. I was so excited to know that this was going to be part of our itinerary, and I began researching details about how they ended up in Missouri. I paid a visit to my local library and I found a wonderful book that I did not know existed. We are all aware of Little House on the Prairie series written by Laura Ingalls Wilder, but there are so many more that are available to learn about this wonderful family. I found this book on the way home. This book was published after Laura Ingalls Wilder had passed away. It's a journal that she wrote in almost daily for 6 weeks as they traveled from De Smet, South Dakota to Mansfield, Missouri, where they found their home, Rocky Ridge Farm. I was so excited to find this book, and I was determined to read it along our journey so we could know what it was like for Laura, Almanzo, and their young daughter, Rose. So as we began on our journey, all settled into our air-conditioned vehicle, driving on asphalt interstates and highways, we read about their journey. We wonder why Laura and Almanzo left South Dakota, left their family in search of something new. The beginning pages give us an insight to that. This is written by Rose. For 7 years there had been too little rain. The prairies were dust. Day after day, summer after summer, the scorching winds blew the dust and the sun was brassy in a yellow sky. Crop after crop failed. Again and again, the barren land must be mortgaged for taxes and food and next year's seed. The agony of hope ended when there was no harvest and no more credit. No money to pay interest and taxes. The banker took the land. Then the bank failed. Laura, Almanzo, and Rose headed out of De Smet on July 17, 1894. So things were rough in South Dakota during this time. There was no way to make a living. They pulled up stakes. They left Ma, Pa, Mary, Carrie, and Grace behind. They loaded up their wagon that Almanzo had painted a shiny black. Even the curtains and the cover for the wagon were black. It may have seemed like a smart choice at the time, but I'm sure it was one they questioned as they rolled along. As they left, everyone waved goodbye, and Pa played his fiddle as they drove out of sight. So as you read this true journal, written in Laura's own hand, just know that the entries are short. Many of us have very short entries in our journal, but they're precise. She tells you exactly where they are, exactly where they've been, exactly where they've camped, experiences along the way. Laura was so precise that even as they crossed different state lines on their journey, she would place an entry in her journal that they crossed at exactly 10:48 1/4. How she knew it to the second, I don't know, but she knew that at 15 seconds after the minute passed, they had crossed into the state of Kansas. As we journeyed along this route to Mansfield, Missouri, we took the time to stop and get breakfast conveniently made for us, and we were waited on by staff. We stopped at the gas station to fuel up our vehicle. We stopped at a roadside rest area where we were able to walk along part of the Mormon Trail. It was all very enjoyable. For Laura and Almanzo, it was a much different story. The days were long and they were hot. Laura notes in her journal that there were times that inside the covered wagon, the temperatures would be in excess of 100 degrees and there was no escaping it. Along their journey, there were many times where they would stop and meet up with different types of people along their own personal journeys. Immigrants from Germany, immigrants from Russia. Sometimes they would stop along their campsites and join in on a meal. Sometimes they would camp further away, but still have the opportunity to meet, share cultures, and share their provisions. At one point, on the 22nd of July, Laura shares how they came upon some immigrants from Russia. They were all too happy to share what they had and invited them into their camps, and they were very, very friendly. And despite the language barriers, the families were all able to spend time together and learn a little more about each other. As Laura and Almanzo were getting ready to move on, Laura writes, "When we were leaving, a woman opened the front of her dress and took out a baking of cold biscuits from right against her bare skin and gave them to me. The man told me to put them in my shirt, but I carried them in Manly's clean handkerchief instead. The man said it was hard for people to cook when traveling. They are very kind people. It is a pity to waste the biscuits, but we could not eat them." What a shame to be so hungry on the road as Laura, Almanzo, and Rose were. But imagine how dire things must have been for them to not eat the biscuits given to them. Imagine what hygiene was like at that time, and the decision to not eat biscuits that were right out from under someone's breasts from their shirt. I can understand why they didn't eat them. On August 15th, Laura writes that as they were traveling, they came across a little dog, and that little dog became a part of their family. She writes, August 15 started at 7:20. Found a little black and tan dog in the road, lost. He is skin and bones, must have been starving, and is afraid of us. We stopped at several houses to ask, but nobody knew where he belonged, so we are taking him along. The children delight to feed him milk. We have named him Fido. Now I mention children because there are other families traveling with them. You know, there's been a little controversy over the years whether Laura wrote the Little House on the Prairie series, or was Rose a little heavy-handed in her editing. If one writes a book, it's said that there is a fine balance in the relationship between writer and editor, and a book does become a blend of the two. However, if you were to ever question whether Laura had the ability to write some of the beautiful things that she did in her stories, I think this puts this to rest. Laura writes on July 23rd, "We started at 8. Hated to leave our camping place. It seems quite like home. We crossed the James River, and in 20 minutes, we reached the top of the bluffs on the other side. We all stopped and looked back at the scene, and I wished for an artist's hand or a poet's brain, or even to be able to tell in good plain prose how beautiful it was. We could see the river winding down the valley, the water gleaming through the trees that grow on the bank. Beyond it, the bluffs rose high and bare, browned and burned, above the lovely green of trees and grass and the shining water. On this side, the bluffs again were gigantic brown waves tumbled and tossed about. On the side of the James, we had passed fields of corn 8 feet high. There are cottonwood hedges along the road, the trees 10 inches through and 35 or 40 feet tall. But it all seems burned and bare after our camping grounds by the river. It's 10 o'clock. It is 101 degrees in the shade in the wagon, and hardly a breath of air." Did you know that Laura had her own revolver? She writes here in her book, "I got my revolver fixed, and then we had to spend much time hunting for feed all over town." It's good to see that despite the fact that this was a long and arduous journey, Laura has a sense of humor and a unique way of looking at things. She has quite the imagination. She writes, "Oh no, we are not out of the world nor behind the times here in the Ozarks. Why, even the cows know the latest. 2 of them feeding along the road were playing Ta-ra-ra-boom-de-ay, the little cow's bell playing ta-ra-ra. Then the bigger cow's bell clanged boom-de-ay. I said, "What is that tune they are playing?" And we listened. It was plain as could be, tones and time and all, and so comical. We drove on singing ta-ra-ra-boom-de-ay along the road. Finally, on August 30th, 1894, Laura, Almanzo, and Rose make it to Mansfield, Missouri. They stay for a while camped out, looking for their perfect farmland that they have hopes of buying. And then one day, they packed up the wagon and would head for what would become Rocky Ridge Farm. Rose writes, "The road went up again. It seemed to go almost vertically up a long, long hill, but my father turned the horses away from it into a fainter track in the valley. Beside us, now a stream of water as clear as glass ran over flat ledges and through shallow pools. In a little while, the wagon tracks turned a ford to a pool. The horses stopped to drink, and my mother said, 'Here we are.'" I really enjoyed reading this book along our journey. What took Laura, Almanzo, and Rose nearly 6 weeks took us mere hours. We stopped for breakfast, stopped for that hike, stopped for fuel, and we arrived at our destination in about 10 hours, where it took them 6 weeks. There was one thing that became very evident in this book. Laura was very disciplined in writing about their journey, and it's a journal that was not found until after she had passed away. Rose, on the other hand, was the one who helped put this book together, and she gives insight to the book. I find it unfortunate and telling that throughout this book, there are times that Rose shares her memories, and it gives insight to her somewhat contentious relationship with her mother and her father. As an example, Laura had saved a $100 bill in her writing desk, and as they were traveling across the country, that $100 bill was safe and secure in that writing desk. When they reached Mansfield and the time finally came for them to take that $100 to the bank so they could purchase their property, it was nowhere to be found. Rose recalls how they had asked her, "Are you sure you didn't take it out to play with it? Are you sure you didn't tell anyone about it?" And Rose took this to heart, and it was something that stuck with her entire life, that they felt that they didn't understand, that she felt that she was not a child. She knew not to play with that money. She knew not to tell anyone about the money. When the money was finally found, it had slipped in a crack in the writing desk. It seemed as though life just went on. They got the money, they went to the bank, they bought their property, but it seems that Rose felt slighted that she was never offered a true apology. It was simply, be quiet, get in the wagon, let's go. And it's unfortunate that she carried that with her her entire life. There's another part in the book where Rose shares her feelings, and although she loved her parents, it shows how sometimes the sting of a young family and words exchanged carry on. Almanzo had spent the day with a man that he had hired, cutting wood and placing it into the wagon to take into town to sell. Upon his return, little Rose runs out with a lantern and she asks him if he had sold all of the wood, and he said he did. Rose says, "I set down the lantern and I ran into the house to tell my mother. 50 cents, he sold it all for 50 cents. Her whole face trembled and seemed to melt into softness. She sighed a long sigh. "Aren't you glad?" I exulted. "Glad? Of course I'm glad," she snapped at me, and to herself, "Oh, thanks be." The fact that Rose used the word snapped puts it into perspective. I ran out again. I pranced out to tell my father how glad she was. And he said, with a sound of crying in his voice, "Oh, why did you tell her? I wanted to surprise her." Rose continues on in her own words, You do such things, little things, horrible, cruel, without thinking, not meaning to. You have done it. Nothing can undo it. This is a thing you can never forget. What a shame. And I'm guilty. I'm guilty as a parent. I'm guilty as a grandparent. But it's sad that Rose held on to those things for as long as she did. Having shared these excerpts of the book and my reading it, I'd like to recommend that if you can find this book at your library, check it out, read it. It gives a little more insight into their travels to Mansfield, Missouri. Like most journals, not every entry is exciting. Some of them are rather mundane and short, but some of them give great insight to their travel. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'll be doing other book reviews, so make sure that you hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, please like it as well. Hit the notification bell so you get notified whenever I put more videos up. Well, that's all for today. Until we see each other again, please take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Say your I love yous, and have a blessed day. Bye-bye.